Welcome to the third annual Museum of African American History Stone Book Award. I am Leon Wilson, President and CEO of the Museum of African American History. The museum represents the free Black community formed in the 18th and 19th centuries that was insistent on the education of their children as a core element strategy to be acknowledged and recognized in their thrust for citizenship. Importantly for us, these efforts are etched in the sites of the African schools located in both of the museum's African American meeting houses in 1808 in Boston and by 1825 on Nantucket. The African School in Boston was reestablished as the Abiel Smith School in 1835. It was the first public school built for the purpose of educating Black children in this country. The museum's committed to celebrating authors whose works inform and inspire us to continuously explore our history. The museum's active 5,000-volume Edward Clark book collection, housed in the Mildred Sawyer Library at Suffolk University, is anchored with a first 1773 edition copy of Phyllis Wheatley's poems on various subjects, religious and moral, a part of a canon of Black literature. Congratulations to our 2020 winner, Jelani Favors. I'm especially pleased that his book, Shelter in a Time of Storm, How Black Colleges Foster Generations of Leadership and Activism, was chosen to be the featured book. His book underscores the significance of these institutions and their impact on the rise of a people often historically denied educational resources of their own. Germane to the erasure of racism and the impact as a quest today, we're pleased to have join us our moderator, Callie Crosley, host of WGBH's Under the Radar, to elevate the banner of intellectual might, as we also congratulate our two finalists, Tiffany Lethabo King for her book, The Black Shoals, Offshore Formations of a Black and Native Studies, and Kianga Yamata Taylor for her book, Race for Profit, How Banks and the Real Estate Industry Undermine Black Ownership. To better understand the enormous task of the jurors to determine the winners of this award, we invite you to review other considered titles on the Museum of African American History Stone Book Award website. In closing, I would like to thank our longstanding partners, Jim and Kathy Stone of the Stone Foundation, for their commitment to the museum's mission and also made the award possible with a generous donation. We'd also like to thank our newest partner, the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the U.S. Senate, and ask you to join me in welcoming our next guest, Ms. Victoria Reggie Kennedy, co-founder and president of the board of the Kennedy Institute.
Thank you so much, Leon, and thank you for all you do for your incredible leadership. Welcome to all of you to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate. We are so proud to partner with the Museum of African American History and with the Stone Foundation for this year's Museum of African American History Stone Book Award. The Kennedy Institute is dedicated to educating the public about the important role of the Senate in our government. We're dedicated to encouraging participatory democracy, to invigorating civil discourse, and to inspiring the next generation of citizens and leaders. We are especially dedicated to inspiring this next generation to voting. And this year, we have launched a new initiative called Just Vote. I encourage you all to take a look at justvote.org. This is going to be a long-term project of the Kennedy Institute. and we are deeply committed to it. I can think of no better time to elevate the authors that are being honored today and their stories as we witness this ongoing activism in the United States to demand changes in our society and encourage our elected leaders to work for a more inclusive system. I hope you enjoy the program today. I know you will enjoy the program today. And it is my distinct honor to turn the program over now to a remarkable woman and a very dear friend, Kathy Stone.
Thank you, Vicki. I'm delighted to be here with all of you this evening to celebrate the joy of reading, the value of knowledge, and of course the critical importance of documenting and sharing African American history and culture. I'm Kathy Stone. I'm the president of the Stone Foundation and a member of the MAAH Stone Book Award Honorary Committee. We have a terrific program ahead of us, and I want to take a few minutes to thank everyone who's made this evening possible. To our jurors, thank you for devoting utmost attention and care to reading all of the submissions and choosing the winners we celebrate tonight. To our authors, thank you for writing with such passion about a diverse range of topics and for sharing your work with us. It is so important. Finally, to the wonderful Pam Waterman, who directs all aspects of the MAAH Stone Book Award, thank you for pouring your heart and soul into this work. We deeply appreciate all you do. It's now my pleasure to pass the mic to our host for the evening, Callie Crossley, who is an award-winning producer, frequent lecturer on literacy, media, politics, and race. She currently has her own show on WGBH. Thank you, Callie.
Welcome. I am so excited to welcome all of you to the MAAH Stone Book Award event. I love this event. Now, normally we have just everybody from New England in our crowd, but because we're virtual this year, we don't know where all of you are coming from. So do us a favor, drop a note in chat and tell us where you're coming from. We'd like to know. You may know that the three top persons in this, top authors in this event are awarded not only the Stone Book Award, but a little cash prize too, $25,000 to the winner and $5,000 each to the finalists. And that's very exciting news. In addition, some of you may have received in your mail a special package with some cookies and the program for tonight. Those were the first 200 of you who signed up for the event. If you want the program, again, go to chat and get the PDF of the program, and you'll be able to follow along if you want to, but no need to if you don't want to. And by the way, speaking of the chat, that's where you'll put your questions. If you go to the bottom of the Zoom page, you'll see where the chat is, and put your questions in. You can put them in at any time during the program. And later on, after I speak with Jelani Favors, then there'll be time for questions for all of you. Now, let's see, something else. We want to make sure that you understand that we're streaming, not just in this space, but also on Facebook. And it's MAAH, M-A-A-H, Stone Book Award. So if you want to send any friends to the Facebook page, you can. And by the way, give us a shout out on social media, hashtag MAAH Stone Book Award. Looking forward to seeing you the rest of the evening.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lee Rayford, and I'm an associate professor of African American and African Diaspora Studies at University of California, Berkeley. I'm very grateful to be a member of the Committee of Jurors for this, the third Stone Book Award, with my colleagues Jarvis Gibbons and Dana Williams. It's my pleasure to offer thoughts on Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor's incisive and challenging Race for Profit, How Banks in the Real Estate Industry Undermine Black Homeownership, a finalist for the Stone Book Award. Just to give you a little background, collectively our committee read approximately 6 books, covering a wide range of themes, time periods, and geographies in African American history and culture. To guide our reading this year as in previous years, we considered criteria including originality, significance of subject, literary quality and excellence in craft, analytical framing and argumentation, depth of research and use of evidence, the scale and the scope of the work, and the author's willingness to take intellectual risks. But this year we read against the backdrop of the intertwined pandemics of COVID-19 and the ongoing catastrophe of anti-Black state violence. Pamela Waterman of the Museum of African American History graciously extended our deadline to submit the shortlist as we sheltered in place, as we sometimes protested in the streets, grieved lives lost, wondered if there would be justice for Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and so many others. Our meeting to deliberate our final selections was rescheduled when the fires here in California surged and the air quality index rose above 200. So when Jarvis, Dana, and I met, via Zoom of course, and during the interregnum between the Republican and Democratic conventions, questions about shelter, home, freedom, citizenship, solidarity, and the possibility of more just futures weighed especially heavy in our conversation. Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor's Race for Profit is a devastating study that demonstrates how the federal government, aligned with an explicitly racist real estate industry, to exploit African Americans' need for adequate housing and desire for home, and in doing so, extract wealth and extend the reach of racial capitalism into the post-civil rights era. Through a rigorous examination of largely unexplored documents from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, as well as a range of other primary sources, Taylor describes the process by which Black folks were admitted into home ownership through the 1968 Housing and Urban Development Act, yet the structures of racial exclusion were refashioned by banks in the real estate industry to preserve inequality under new laws. Taylor offers us the very useful term predatory inclusion, which she describes as a form of colorblind neutrality that extended questionable credit to Black buyers, limited them to substandard housing stock in non-white neighborhoods, and extracted wealth from Black homeowners even as their homes and neighborhoods were devalued. Ultimately, predatory inclusion blamed Black homeowners for their eventual inability, unwillingness, or refusal to maintain homeownership against such stacked odds. Yet in a country that understands property ownership as a right and a key route to personal happiness, wealth accumulation, and national stability, Black Americans found themselves wrestling with the ways housing as a commodity and home, a place of belonging, have not been one and the same within a society structured in and through racial capitalism. In the face of such structural predation, Race for Profit powerfully recounts that at every turn, Black Americans, led primarily by Black women, organized for legislation to make the housing market more equitable and insisted on creating a home place for themselves and their children. Race for Profit uncovers the roots of our contemporary housing crises that disproportionately affect Black and brown folks, from the rise of gentrification and housing resegregation to the subprime mortgage crisis. Yet Taylor doesn't argue for more reform. Rather, her research leads her to make an argument, quote, against homeownership. And this led to a really lively conversation amongst our jury. What I appreciate is Taylor's reminder that to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past, that is to undo a system designed to fail Black folks, we cannot hold fast to structures or ideologies that only produce more exploitation. And if you've read Taylor's recent New Yorker column against the Supreme Court, you're already familiar. Rather, Taylor stokes our political imagination. Race for Profit reminds us that this moment demands scholarship that is full of meticulous research, unflinching writing, bold thinking, as well as a kind of fearlessness to let go and reimagine even the ideas we hold closest. Please join me in congratulating Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor.
Hi, my name is Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor. I'm the author of Race for Profit, How Banks and the Real Estate Industry Undermined Black Homeownership. I'd like to thank the judges for considering my book as a finalist for the Museum of African American History's Stone Book Award for 2020. I'd also like to congratulate fellow finalist Tiffany Lathabo King and our winner, Jelani M. Favors. Many thanks to the University of North Carolina Press for not only publishing my book, but for exhausting all of the efforts that go into publishing good scholarship today. I'm very appreciative for the recognition of this history that has been brought to light and the historical roots to the kinds of inequality that continue to plague our society. And I hope that the understanding of the longevity of these kinds of inequalities can help inform the contemporary struggles, the ongoing struggles to uproot it. So thank you very much again for recognition of my book. Thank you for the designation of the book as a finalist for this prize, and I'm very glad to be here with you all tonight. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Jarvis Givens, and I'm an assistant professor of education and a faculty affiliate in the Department of African and African American Studies at Harvard University. And it is my pleasure to offer a bit of praise for Tiffany King's book, The Black Shoals, Offshore Formations of Black and Native Studies, which will continue to be an important text until we find some way to begin again, creating a world not premised on Black abjection and Native genocide. Tiffany King asks, quote, "What happens or needs to happen when Black diasporic people, aesthetics, and politics land and encounter Native people's cosmologies and resistance to conquest?" End quote. King takes readers on an intellectual journey to seek out an ethical means of approaching such a question and new ways to make meaning of Black and Indigenous peoples' entangled experiences of subjugation, resistance, and pleasure under relations of conquest that have yet to cease. At the heart of King's book is an imaginative conceptual intervention of the shoal, which disrupts conventions in both Black and Native studies. The former largely drawing on water and oceanic metaphors to analyze Black life in the Atlantic world, and the latter taking land as its central analytic. Like the shoals that are geological and oceanic formations that arise between sea and land, being neither one or the other, but some entanglement of both, the theoretical and methodological shoals offered in King's book collapse binary thinking that prevent deeper understanding about the entanglements of Black and Native life. The same way that shoals force ships to pause and navigate with caution, King requires us to slow down and notice the blurred realities of Black and Native peoples, placing archival materials, cultural objects, and political events that would otherwise be understood separately in relationship to one another. King wanders between the defacing of a Christopher Columbus statue in the context of a Black Lives Matter demonstration in Boston, novels by Black women that feature intertwined lives of Black and Indigenous people, as well as an 18th century British map of the coast of South Carolina and Georgia. Ultimately, the book strives for a protocol of study unmediated by white modes of speech and tools for analyzing genocide and slavery's aftermath. It models and forms how we might think and do otherwise. In the Black Shoals, we find an alternative site to gather in Black and Native study, a new meeting place to come together and imagine Black and Indigenous futures. King reclaims an important strain in the Black radical tradition, insisting that Black healing is inextricably linked to Indigenous healing. Braving the way into new intellectual territory, King has created an opening for scholars to build on the theoretical and methodological shoals offered in this beautiful and important book. So thank you, Professor King, and congratulations.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so grateful to be in the virtual presence of this community of individuals committed to creating spaces for public conversations about African American history, literature, and culture. I'm extremely grateful to the Museum of African American History and the James and Kathleen Stone Foundation, without whom this book award would not exist. And I'd especially like to take the time to thank Dr. Pamela Waterman, who reached out to me and Duke University Press about my book and making sure it was submitted by the deadline. Pamela, the outreach you provide, especially for first-time authors, is so important. Even a year out of this process of publishing my book, I remain overwhelmed by post-production duties, ongoing marketing efforts, and just the due diligence I have to do to my own book and press as an author. So thank you for helping me give some order to this post-production journey of sharing it with an ever-widening community. The work you are doing to curate literary works in African American history and culture is so important and is already serving scholars as a critical resource. And while I am certainly so grateful to the jurors, Dr. Jarvis Givens, Dr. Dana Williams, and Dr. Lee Rayford for selecting my book, more so, I'm just in a state of awe um, about their ability to narrow the list down. I've seen the entire book list, and it is replete with authors that I admire. So, what a task. I really, really appreciate the work and care you took with each book to consider the author's unique claims, our labors to make our methods and approaches clear. It's really, truly affirming to be heard and on some level understood as an author. So thank you for tearing with and caring for our work. And as a recipient of this award, it's fitting that my book's first substantive chapter opens with the 2015 defacing of a statue of Columbus located in your city on the waterfront in the north end of Boston. The defacing, specifically the tagging of the statue with the words Black Lives Matter in 2015, and the recent 2020 beheading of the statue this past June by American Indian activists during the rebellions that followed the murder of George Floyd, are examples of the centuries of abolitionist and decolonial struggle that the book The Black Shoals seeks to honor. Black and Indigenous people's struggles in the city of Boston and globally animate the force and energy of my book. And I thank you for taking the time to listen to my book's narratives of Black and Indigenous liberation struggles, as well as their echoes that are finding form in our contemporary moments for justice. So thank you. And finally, it is an honor to be in the good company of such esteemed colleagues like Dr. Jelani Favors and Dr. Kianga Yamada Taylor. I so love your work and I'm grateful for the work that you do. And congratulations to both of you. I'm beyond elated that my book gets to sit on the MAAH Stone bookshelf alongside both of yours. So thank you again.
Good evening. My name is Dana Williams, and I am Professor of African American Literature in the Department of English and Interim Dean of the Graduate School at Howard University. Each year, my fellow jurors and I are excited in the summer to receive those books that have been nominated for the Stone Book Awards. This year, we receive them a little bit differently. Typically, we get 3 big boxes all at one time, and we begin to figure out which ones are on our list to read immediately, and then which ones we'll have to read for the final round. This year was a little different in the sense that we received them little by little because of COVID, but we were no less excited about the work that was ahead of us. It really is nerd juice and during a pandemic. The book this year that was selected was one that immediately rose to the top of the list for each of the jurors. So it was something of an easy choice in the sense that it was timely and timeless. We would have been excited about this book had we not been in the middle of a pandemic, had we not been in the middle of racial transformation or racial strife and cultural transformation. But there was something about this book arriving at this moment to help us to understand the role that HBCUs have played over the years in transforming our culture that made it really, really special. Another thing that's important about this book is the way that the story is told. One of the things that one of the jurors said, for instance, is that this book is so obviously very deeply researched, but Jelani Favors actually made it look easy and effortless. The seams didn't show, to use the metaphor from one of my favorite authors. So while we know that the work was tireless and that the archival work was really important, it came together very nicely so that it felt like a book that we could all receive and that it was immediately readable without compromising its sophistication in any way. The book is important for so many reasons, one of which is because it does the hard work of dealing with the Black Archive and Black archives at HBCUs, which unfortunately are undermined in terms of people being able to access them and do important work with them. This book is different in this regard. The scholarship is really solid. The work is really important, and it tells a story that will help us to understand that Black people have always resisted and that HBCUs have always been at the forefront of that conversation. We were so excited to select this book as the winner of the Stone Book Award and want to say congratulations to Jelani on behalf of the communities that this book serves, the communities that have served you, and the communities that have certainly served me as well. Congratulations, a job well done.
Good evening. I am Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, Chair of the Museum of African American History Stone Book Award Honorary Committee and Research Professor of Education at Harvard University. I want to offer my congratulations to this year's award winner, Jelani Favors, for his extraordinary masterpiece, Shelter in a Time of Storm: How Black Colleges Fostered Generations of Leadership and Activism. As well as my congratulations to the two finalists, Kianga Yamata Taylor and Tiffany Letabo King, for their revelatory and compelling works, Race for Profit and the Black Shoals. Finally, I want to express my deep appreciation to the amazing jurors, Dana Williams, Jarvis Givens, and Lee Rayford, for their discernment, endurance, hard work, and good judgment. Thank you all very much.
Hello, my name is Suzanne Nossel. I'm the CEO of PEN America, and I'm also a member of the honorary committee for the MAAH Stone Book Award. And it's a great pleasure to congratulate Dr. Jelani Favors, this year's winner, for his book, Shelter in a Time of Storm: How Black Colleges Fostered Generations of Leadership and Activism. I'm grateful to the jurors for selecting this timely book that inserts itself right into the most pressing debates underway in our society, and want to offer my best wishes to Dr. Favor. Thank you.
Welcome, and it's so good to be here with you this evening. I'm Paula Johnson, president of Wellesley College and a member of the Museum of African American History's Stone Book Award Honorary Committee. Congratulations to this year's award winner, Dr. Jelani Favors, for Shelter in a Time of Storm: How Black Colleges Fostered Generations of Leadership and Activism. Such an important topic and book for our time. I also want to congratulate our two finalists, Dr. King and Taylor, for your contributions. Our three phenomenal jurors had a difficult job, and thank you to them as well. Congratulations.
Greetings. My name is Julia Scott. My 2018 book, The Common Wind, was the 2019 MAAH Stone Book Award winner of this organization. I would like to speak to the people who are this year's awardees. This year's Stone Book Award winner is Jelani Favors. Jelani Favors wrote a book entitled Shelter in a Time of Storm: How Black Colleges Fostered Generations of Leadership and Activism. Obviously a very timely and important subject. Thank you very much, Professor Favors. I'd like to thank very much all of these three authors, but also the people who worked really hard here, who were the panel of jurors whose hard work has enabled them to offer us quite an important selection of books and authors for this year's 2020 prize winners. Thank you.
What up? My name is Keith Mann. I am the director and executive producer of the Emmy Award-winning series Free Ray Sean, as well as the co-creator and executive producer of The Breaks. I am a proud Morehouse man, and I wanted to congratulate my dude, Jelani Favors, for winning this year's $25,000 MAAH Stone Book Award for his book, Shelter in a Time of Storm. Jelani, I could not be more proud of you. You know how much I love you and your entire family, and you know how much my family loves you and how much we love this book. So I also want to congratulate you guys, the MAAH Stone Book Award Selection Committee, for recognizing Jelani's incredible work. My family alone has purchased a vast number of these books to give away to family and friends as gifts because the legacy and the work of historically black colleges in this country is so important and vital to the fabric of this nation. And I just want to recognize and celebrate Jelani for his role in telling that story and promoting that story. And thank you, bruh. Black excellence. Jelani Favors.
Well, wow. I'm so excited for you, Dr. Jelani Favors. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Callie. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, are there people that you wanted to comment to before we get started in our back and forth?
Absolutely, absolutely. If you've picked up a copy of Shelter in a Time of Storm, I received a lot of jokes from my friends who said, wow, your acknowledgement section is extensive. It was a little longer than usual because this project was a labor of love and emphasis on labor. But I do want to take a few brief minutes to acknowledge forces and people within my life who absolutely made this moment possible. I want to thank God for this moment. I want to thank my family, both of which this would not have been possible. This would not have materialized. So I thank the support of God, and I thank the support of my family as well. I certainly want to thank the Museum of African American History and everyone affiliated with the Stone Book Award Project, the Stone Book Foundation. Again, this is just an honor that is indescribable. So thank you so much for this moment and for this opportunity. I want to thank the finalists and all of the nominees for their incredible contributions to the canon. Like so many others have commented, I was blown away at the incredible work that was produced this year and put out in the midst of this pandemic. So it was an honor simply to stand shoulder to shoulder with my colleagues across the country with an attempt to interpret the Black experience. I certainly want to thank UNC Press, who has certainly been there from the very beginning. They believed in this project from day one and through all of their support behind making it materialize. So thank you to everyone at UNC Press, down to the editorial board, down to the marketing staff. Just incredible job to everyone affiliated with the press. Thank you so much for your support. I certainly want to thank all of my extensive friends and my family who have been supportive throughout the years, who again watched this project from the very beginning, saw its low points and saw its high points. And so I'm extremely grateful to that community. And then lastly, I want to reserve a very special space and a very special shout out to my mother, Reverend Gail Favors, who currently is in her hospital bed battling COVID-19. And I know that this is something that has affected so many millions of Americans across this country. So I ask for those who believe in the power of prayer to send a special prayer, to send a whisper, the name of Gail Favors, and to send positive energy, not only to her, but to all of those who are battling COVID-19 and this virus, which has gripped our country. So this is a moment, it's a bittersweet moment for me, but I know that, Mom, if you're watching this, that I have had your support from day one and for your love and your prayers. And so this one's for you, Mom. I love you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Favors. And we're holding good thoughts for your mother, of course. So the book is Shelter in a Time of Storm: How Black Colleges Foster Generations of Leadership and Activism. You make two crucial points about how this happened. The first was about something called the second curriculum. Explain to people what that is.
There are three institutions that are indispensable to the Black experience. The Black family is one, the Black church is the other, and historically Black colleges and universities are that third institution, which have proven indispensable. And so I thank my colleagues and my professors at Ohio State who encouraged me to take a deeper and closer look at HBCUs, believing that that story had not been fully told. And so as I began that process of research and looking into the stories of Black colleges, one of the things that clearly stood out was that beyond Latin, beyond Greek, beyond math and science, there was a burgeoning, building curriculum that was filled with race consciousness, idealism, and cultural nationalism. And so I defined it as the second curriculum. And when you look at all three components of that curriculum, they very much explain how these institutions became incubators, beginning with in 1837 with the founding of the Institute for Colored Youth, all the way through the 20th century and even to this present day. They became incubators for radicalism and for the politicization of Black youth who were therefore transformed into agents for change. And so the second curriculum played a large part of that. You know, James Weldon Johnson said that when he was a student at Morehouse, that the institution, they talked race. Everything revolved around race. And these were race men and race women who were being produced by these institutions, who took on the responsibility of pushing the movement forward, pushing the liberation struggle for Black people forward. And that's been a constant theme of Black colleges, again, from 1837 all the way to today. When you look at people like Stacey Abrams and Keisha Lance Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta, who's a graduate of Florida A&M, and people like Ibram Kendi, who's also a graduate of Florida A&M, and Ta-Nehisi Coates, who's a graduate of Howard. These institutions are still producing leaders at the forefront of our society who are challenging us to become our better selves.
And the second overarching critical factor was something you call communitas, which is the connection between those schools, those students, and the community. Explain.
Again, when you look at the legacy and the history of HBCUs, there has always been an attempt to suggest that these are institutions and simply remodeling themselves after their predominantly white counterparts. And one of the things that quickly stood out to me was that simply was not the case. So in my attempt to describe the space that enveloped these students, one of my colleagues at Morgan State University introduced me to the writings of Victor Turner and said, look, you should re-examine how he talks about this concept of communitas, right? The idea of a ritual space, the idea of building social relationship. That's exactly what these institutions were providing. It wasn't just brick and mortar. It wasn't just, as with the second curriculum, it wasn't just the day-to-day teachings and curriculum that existed at predominantly white institutions. This was an interstitial space. It was a space within a space. It was a racialized space. And that space became so critical to cultivating Black womanhood and Black manhood. And again, providing a vision of where the Black folks could move in terms of liberation. So out of that communitas, we get people like Diane Nash, we get people like Ella Baker, we get people like Ruby Doris Smith, we get people like Dr. King and Stokely Carmichael because of that critical space that they were exposed to. And again, how it was infused with race consciousness and cultural nationalism and idealism. So space in itself is critical. Space matters, right? And so these were scholars and administrators who were very intentional, very deliberate in the type of space that they were carving, that they were crafting, knowing that it would be critically important to mold and to nurture the future generations of Black America.
So let's talk about some of that deliberation. I'd love you to read an excerpt from the book starting on page 127.
Sure.
While you get the book, let me remind people to put their questions in the Q&A chat. There's nearly 200 of you joining us. Glad to have you. And you can send your questions in now, or anytime through my conversation with Dr. Favors, and we'll take them after I've completed my chat with him.
So you want me to set this up, or okay?
Yes.
So,
well, go ahead.
So you're asking me to read a portion of the chapter from Alabama State University, which was one of the more intriguing stories that I found within this research journey that I was on. Alabama State University, of course, is located in Montgomery, Alabama, in the cradle of the Confederacy, as Montgomery was often referred to. But so again, this is where that space matters. And Alabama State University and its long history of nurturing Black youth and providing them exposure to the second curriculum. This is where that space really began to come to life in the 1950s in this post-World War II environment as the civil rights movement was burgeoning. What were these students learning? What were they being exposed to? And this portion, I think, really exposes that in a very unique way. And it reads thusly. It says, quote, "The inferno of student activism reached Montgomery on Thursday morning, February 25th, 1960. And again, the sit-ins, of course, began February the 1st, 1960. 39 students from Alabama State University entered the Montgomery County Courthouse and initiated a sit-in. In the days and months that followed, city and state officials placed greater pressure on the man who was responsible for bringing all of these activist synergies together on campus, Harper Council Trenholm, who was, of course, president of Alabama State University. Mayor Earl James of Montgomery alluded to what many members of the white establishment were thinking when he urged, quote, any responsible Negro leaders to counsel their race to discontinue this harassment, end quote. James' search for a shepherd to herd the Black sheep was futile. Much like Clark, the older generation of Montgomery's Black community was confused and nervous about what the students' actions would mean, but no one was prepared to corral the suddenly courageous students of ASU, not even Trenholm. In the students' first public statement concerning the protests, they echoed concepts that they had learned over and over again at Alabama State University and principles that Trenholm had aggressively promoted beginning in his early days partnering with Ambrose Caliver, who was an agent of and a member of the Black cabinet established by Franklin Delano Roosevelt during the New Deal. The resolute youth declared, quote, we only wish to gain our rights as guaranteed to us by the federal Constitution and the Bill of Rights, end quote. Ironically, when word was passed down that Governor John Patterson was pressuring Trenholm to expel the students responsible for the demonstration, Reverend Uriah J. Fields, a local Black minister and activist, was reported as saying, quote, it is regrettable that the governor has attempted to make Trenholm responsible for student behavior, end quote. The truth was, in the larger picture, he absolutely was the responsible party. Although Trenholm did not take any steps to physically stop the students from continuing the protests, he ultimately broke under the state's pressure to expel the student leaders who rallied the troops back on campus. The reality was that Governor Patterson set up a shadow presidency, swiftly delivering orders to the embattled administrator who faced a personal and moral dilemma of the highest order. Comply with Patterson's directives or risk the financial future of the school and endanger the livelihoods of all those employed under his watch. The initial sit-in participants were not arrested on the day of the protest, but as the identities of the core leaders were leaked, 9 students, Bernard Lee, St. John Dixon, Edward Jones, Leon Rice, Howard Shipman, Troy Emery, James McFadden, Joseph Patterson, and Marzette Watts were ultimately targeted and are ordered expelled from the university, with 20 others placed on academic probation. Immediately recognizing that it was a mandate from the governor, the students directly petitioned Patterson and once again revealed the residual effects of the second curriculum embedded within them. Quote, we, a united group of students of said college, humbly request that you reconsider your order to President Trenholm, end quote. Addressing the paradox of segregation, a topic that they continuously discussed in the communitas that enveloped them, they continued, quote, it is a flagrant contradiction of the Christian and democratic ideals of our nation. One can only imagine how startled Patterson must have been. Black students attending a school that he and generations of Southern whites had attempted to cripple through decades of underfunding were taking him to school on the topic of ethics and American government. Their final retort may have caused Patterson even more consternation. Without flinching, the students declared, quote, "Our behavior was in line with what we have been taught," end quote. So, and if I could just briefly kind of comment on that, Callie. Again, when you look at the components of the second curriculum, one of those components is idealism. And when I say idealism, over and over again, one of the major sources for comprising this study were Black college newspapers. Which had long really been ignored by so many scholars. Many scholars had not pressed in depth to uncover the gold mine of rich narrative and rich primary sources found within. But when I say idealism, over and over again within these student newspapers, you see students being drilled in two major concepts: citizenship and democracy. Citizenship and democracy. They're constantly talking about the idea of citizenship and democracy, which always struck me as ironic because those were two of the things that Black folks were denied on a daily basis in Jim Crow America. Right. And so, but yet here are these students who are walking constitutionalists, right, who understand what their rights are because they've been taught their rights. And again, when you fuse that together with race consciousness and a sense of cultural nationalism, we see these young students becoming voices of radicalism and transformation and change as the civil rights movement in 1960 is beginning to explode. And the fact is that they did not even put the blame on Harper Council Trenholm. That's another person who's really been, I think, resurrected through this study. One of my good friends, Taylor Branch, who of course is a Pulitzer Prize winning author who's written extensively on Dr. King and others, said, you told me personally that, you're really kind of providing a different narrative here on who Harper Council Trenholm really was, because like so many other Black college presidents, they had been dealt with a heavy hand and defined as Uncle Toms, as people who betrayed the movement. But again, I think, and I hope what my study has done is caused us to take a closer look at the legacy and the role of Black college presidents and administrators and faculty members who were critical in shaping this environment, this communitas, and therefore providing a springboard, a catalyst for the civil rights movement in 1960.
So you got a lot of the student voices from the work that you did and really going through student newspapers, and so that you could hear from the students themselves, even if other documents did not express exactly what was going on inside those walls. Because to your point, some of those presidents were caught in this weird gray area of having to show one face to their white sponsors of the school, and at the same time try to foster what was going on inside the school, which they knew would not be appreciated outside of the campus walls.
Without question. I mean, you look at someone like Harper Council Trenholm, he's hiring people like Thelma Glass. He's hiring people like Joanne Robinson, who was the principal architect of the Montgomery bus boycott, who taught at Alabama State for several years, right? And so here is a woman who's a member of the Women's Political Council, right, who was heavily involved in orchestrating and creating the Montgomery bus boycott long before King and others thought of engaging in that action. It was women on the forefront, and many of these women taught at Alabama State University, and they nurtured these students. Joanne Robinson is the faculty advisor to the student newspaper. Right. And so when you look at these explosive and radical op-eds that students are writing, the stories that they're writing and that they're covering, it shows the legacy of political consciousness that's emerging on these college campuses. Again, we're not talking about just the 1960s and the radicalism that we understand so much that emerged from that decade. We're talking about the 1950s and the 1940s and the 1930s. You look at those student newspapers and they are brimming with race consciousness, and they're also brimming with radicalism. I like to give a shout out to Kadada Williams, whose excellent study on Reconstruction and racial violence really kind of encouraged me to understand that writing in itself is a form of activism. right? And so when these students are documenting their stories and their experiences and using the pages of their student newspapers to express their angst and their frustration with white supremacy, this is really protest, right? And again, we don't think of the 40s and the 50s being defined by student protest, but when you look at these student newspapers at Black colleges, that's exactly what students were engaging in.
In our documentary Eyes on the Prize, which I worked on, Joanne Robinson's, what she said and how she got those first flyers out about Rosa Parks, stays with you. I didn't go to bed that night. I copied all those mimeographs all night. So you can imagine her presence in the classroom with those students. Absolutely. Now, your whole book is destroying, I think, a myth that has sometimes hung over HBCUs, that they are very conservative in their political output, in their thinking about, social issues, and snooty, like it's all about the talented 10th, not about the community. Right. You've shown something else throughout, as you've said, all of the early years and the years that people may be more familiar with in the modern civil rights movement. Would you speak to that?
Absolutely. One of my favorite chapters in this book was the chapter on Bennett College, which, by the way, was the last chapter that I wrote for this book. That chapter originally was supposed to be about Howard University, but a friend of mine who I was actually doing a fellowship with at Duke University, who taught at Bennett at the time, said, "Look, you should really write about Bennett. You should say something about Bennett." And I said, "You know what? You're right." Right? That no one ever talks about the importance of Bennett College. And I'm so thankful that I took her advice, because when you look at the story of Bennett, right, or even the story of Spelman, which of course, those are the only two institutions that were completely dedicated to educating Black women, we see this concept of responsibility politics, right? That we see the idea and the notion of Black women attending Vespers in their white gloves and again in a very delicate way, navigating the arena of class within the Black community. And one of the things that I think came very abundantly clear is that, at least with Bennett, is that these women took those white gloves off and they rolled up their sleeves and they directly and deeply engaged within movement activity. One of the things that really kind of prompted this book is that, as a graduate student taking a class in the history of Black education, there are several stories that we already know about Black colleges. We know the story of classism. We know the story of paternalism. We know the story of conservatism and how it, in some ways, defined these institutions, at least from the perspective of previous scholars and authors. We know the stories of colorism, right, and how they existed on Black college campuses, particularly, again, many of the elite institutions such as Howard and Fisk and Tuskegee and Spelman. All of them, Hampton University, all of these institutions were dogged and plagued by the legacy of colorism within the Black community. But one of the things that had not been discussed was the legacy of activism that emerged out of these institutions. And so I really tried to push back against that narrative. And again, I let the primary resources speak for me. And one of the things that exploded even out of these student newspapers, is that these were students who were prepared and ready to move beyond classism, to move beyond, again, respectability politics, and to firmly assume their role within the Black struggle, regardless of class. One of the things that I highlight and discuss in the introduction is looking at the role of SNCC, right? The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which of course was comprised largely of Black college students. When those students went into Lowndes County, when those students went into St. Augustine and to all these other deep rural communities throughout the Mississippi Delta, they didn't come with an air of elitism and that we're better than these poor sharecroppers who we're trying to motivate and mobilize to engage in the movement. They came with the spirit of service, and they understood that their struggles are one and the same. The oppression that they experience on a daily basis, we also experience, and we're working in conjunction, in concert with them to eradicate those forces. So I think that this idea of classism has, again, in some respects been overplayed and has not been dealt with and looked at in terms of the complexities of how this all evolved, specifically on these Black college campuses.
Something else that is all throughout the book, which I don't know why I should be surprised, because you mentioned SNCC, and of course we're familiar with SNCC's or struggle and tension with the older members, older organizers of the modern civil rights movement, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Those were older ministers and so forth. But throughout your book, from the very earliest, the younger students, even in the most restricted, limited places where race has constricted them in a way that can barely move at all in society, they are pushing against the older folks to be more radical, to express themselves more fully, even within those parameters.
Right.
You know, were you surprised by that? That it was so early on?
One of the great discoveries that I found in the archives was a letter that Septima Clark, who of course was a longtime organizer in South Carolina, and of course had worked with the Highlander Folk School and trained generations of young activists. A letter that Septima Clark had written to Solomon Say, who of course was a longtime organizer in Alabama, but also a graduate of Alabama State University. And there's this correspondence between them as the sit-ins are unfolding. I think I mentioned it in the book, but if not, I'm highlighting it here. There's this correspondence between them where they're saying, hey, where did these sit-ins come from, right? And so there's this older generation who are extremely nervous. Why? Because they're Black youth going into spaces they have been told all their lives, don't go in that store. Right? Don't go mess with those white folks, right? You're gonna come out and not be the same, or you won't come out at all, right? And so they've been told all their lives to not go into these spaces. They've been told all their lives to not engage in this public rhetoric. And all of a sudden you see students in the 1960s crossing this deep psychological river of fear. And again, this is not to suggest that the generations before them did not make strides, but what is very clear is that racial violence had played a critical role in giving generations of Black folks considerable pause in terms of how they went about attacking and addressing Jim Crow policies and white supremacy. And one of the ways in which they did that is that they kept their heads down and they primed future generations. Again, another one of the letters, actually it wasn't even a letter, I take that back. This is an interview that I did with Jabril Kazan. Jabril Kazan, of course, is one of the initial ANT4 who engaged in the sit-ins, who launched the sit-ins in 1960. And in this interview I did with him, and this is when I'm first beginning, this is 1999, when I'm putting together a master's thesis on North Carolina A&T. But in that interview that I did with him, he said that it was his teachers who told him that he had a role to play, that he was going to be a future leader, and that we needed him to keep his hands on the freedom plow. He says, it was my teachers who told me that, right? And then he went on to say, this was the money shot for me. He said, that was before Rosa Parks came along. That's before Dr. King came along. That's what I was taught in my segregated school in Greensboro, North Carolina. So this is Jabril Kazan, also known as Ezell Blair, telling me that long before the movement emerged, it was Black teachers who were molding and shaping and encouraging young Black students to think of themselves as agents of change. And to me, that was so powerful in documenting the fact that there's a story to be told here. As I said before, that was an interview I conducted with him in 1999. And that really kind of became the springboard for saying, you know what, I think there indeed may be a book that can tell a broader story of Black colleges, something to dig at these stories that Jabril Kazan have, because he's not alone there. I mean, again, you know, almost every Black folk I know, right? I'm from North Carolina, born and raised, but you know, almost all Black folks that I know have somebody in their family, right? A relative, a cousin, a friend, somebody who attended the HBCU. Right. And these are the type of stories that I've heard over and over again. Right. You know, I'm a preacher's kid, and in the church, you know, we have this saying, you know, you can't tell it, let me tell it. Right. And there's so many Black alumni, Black HBCU alumni who can tell you these stories of agents who agents of change who transformed their lives and told them to pass it on. right? And I think that's what Jabril Kazan really represents. And not just Jabril Kazan, but again, scores of Black folks who are alumnus of these institutions who receive these same type of edifying, powerful messages to find ways to transform and to better their communities.
It's about time for me to transition to audience questions, but I want to ask this, if maybe you could just briefly give me a response. The relevancy of what you have documented in your book for this moment in this time.
Right. Yeah. And again, I'm thank you for that question. You know, this is a moment where we have to be very intentional and very deliberate in creating and passing on messages for young people to inspire them to continue to keep their hands on the freedom plow. And the best way to do that is through education, right? It's through training, it's through teaching, right? We see so many of these young kids now in the streets of Atlanta, in the streets of DC, in the streets of Portland, Oregon, you know, all throughout this country, all throughout this world, we see once again a burgeoning movement. And I think the question should be, is that what role will Black colleges play this time around? You know, how will they continue to help generate and create an environment that is, one, educating the students about the past, but also providing them a path forward and how they can continue to engage and push forward this movement. One of the things that concerns me about what we see evolving around us is the propensity of a movement to become a moment. Right. And I mean, you think of the civil rights movement, and you know this as a former producer with the Eyes on the Prize. This was not a short movement, right? This was over a decade of continuing to fight, to continuing to grind. It's going to take institutions to help train, to help educate, to help expand the horizons of their students to understand what role they can play in continuing to push this movement forward. So I'm hoping, whether it's historically Black colleges, which I hope is going to continue to be historically Black colleges, but also for those who are working at predominantly white institutions, to see themselves as educators whose prime responsibility is to continue to elevate the understanding of their students, to understand the importance of democracy and equality in America, and how they can continue to be agents for change, moving those ideas forward.
Okay, let's start with the questions. Was the ASU students' protest a peaceful one? What is your position on Black people educating their own as we are global citizens?
Well, first of all, peaceful is relative, right? I mean, the Black populace of Montgomery was always exposed to racial violence and white terrorism. And so in many ways, they were responding to that generations of racial violence and white terrorism. In doing so, they themselves did not engage in using violence, but they did use their voices and they did use their bodies to clog the streets of Montgomery and to express their desires for first-class citizenship, equality, and the humanity of all. And so while they didn't personally engage in violence, they were responding to the legacy, a long legacy of racial violence which had been perpetrated against them. What's the second part of that question?
What is your position on Black people educating their own as we are global citizens?
I mean, again, I think that's critically important, right? When you look at the legacy of Black colleges and their original mission, right? Black colleges were trained to serve two basic professions, ministers and teachers, right? To educate future ministers and future teachers. That's the legacy of HBCUs, particularly going back to the 19th century into the early 20th century, that Reconstruction era. There was a pressing need for Black educators. And so Black colleges helped to fill that void. And in doing so, again, you look at the comments of people like Jabril Kazan, who I just mentioned, saying, hey, it was my teacher, right? Who educated me, who molded me, who provided me with a very powerful counter message that you aren't someone who doesn't have a culture. You're not someone who doesn't have humanity, that indeed you are someone who is valuable, who is needed, and more importantly, impressed upon them the idea of racial responsibility, right? That you have a job, a mission to go and to serve your community. And so indeed, Black educators have always been vitally important. And I think that's another one of my concerns as well, is that moving forward, and I addressed this in the epilogue, Black colleges in some ways have transformed the curriculum. And now they are very heavily STEM focused, as are a number of institutions. And I provide a graph in that epilogue which shows that education majors and humanities majors and social science majors have all dipped in recent years in favor for business and for the STEM fields. And again, this is not to denigrate STEM or the arena of business or tech. But I think it's critically important that Black colleges continue to turn out conscientious, powerful agents of change who will serve as our future educators, our future professors and scholars. Again, this is why I salute people like Talitha LaFloria, who's a graduate of Clark Atlanta and also a graduate of Howard University. People like Ibram Kendi, who's a graduate of Florida A&M and Ta-Nehisi Coates, because again, these are folks who are products of HBCUs who are still pushing the humanities and social sciences forward. So yes, absolutely, Black educators are critically important.
How would you describe the work of educating other races and Black struggles versus allocating our energy to caring for and maintaining the Black community?
Repeat the question one more time.
How would you describe the work of educating other races and Black struggles versus allocating our energy to caring for and maintaining the Black community?
Here's the problem as it relates to the legacy of white supremacy. If Black folks could have solved white supremacy, they would have solved that a long time ago. And I think it is critically important for white Americans to understand what role that they can play in crafting and creating an anti-racist society. When you look at the history and legacy of SNCC, that was one of the divisions that began to bubble over and take hold of that organization in 1965 and 1966 in particular, is that a number of Black activists within that organization said, look, it's going to take white members of SNCC going back into the white community and doing the work that is important there, not just going down to Mississippi to register Black folks to vote, which many of them did in 1964 during Freedom Summer, but it's going to take white Americans moving forward and going back into their communities in an attempt to deconstruct white supremacy, because again, that's something that Black folks have been struggling and trying to do for years and have never been able to achieve, largely because of how so deeply embedded it is into almost every facet of American life. And so it's going to take, again, white folks understanding their role and their legacy, which comes back full circle to the book, right? What messages are they receiving at the institutions that they attend? Perhaps, there may be a need for more white students to begin attending HBCUs and being exposed to that environment. One of the shocking things that came out last year, and maybe it wasn't so shocking, but you began to see all these images of white politicians who, when they were in college, were draped in blackface, and they were again. That's something it's a completely different environment, a completely different space. And these are folks who graduated from SEC schools in the 1970s and 1980s, right? And so again, it begs the question. The importance of space and what people are being exposed to and the type of environment they're being exposed to. So again, I think it's critically important that folks work within the communities that they are situated. And this is not to suggest that, again, white people cannot play a critical role in working alongside African-American people, but it's going to take white Americans going back and speaking with their family and their friends and helping to deconstruct white supremacy within those spaces as well.
What happened to the activism in the 70s and 80s?
Again, this is something I take up in the epilogue, and I'll keep it situated with HBCUs. HBCUs underwent a very dramatic change in the 1970s and 1980s, largely because the humanities and the social sciences really began to be undermined at many of those institutions. And again, this is not to suggest that Black activism was not still bubbling over in the 70s and 80s. In fact, I have one of my good friends who just wrote a book on Howard University and student activism there in the 1980s. So there was still indeed this idea of conscientious students emerging on those campuses. But I think when you look at this, and ironically, this sort of parallels a renaissance, a golden renaissance for Black colleges in the 1980s. Black colleges were emerging and becoming more popular within popular culture. You saw not do the right thing, but A Different World, the television show. You saw School Days. You saw all these examples of Black colleges playing a critical space, playing a critical role rather within Black popular culture. But the environment was changing in the 1970s and 1980s. You had an expanding Black middle class. And many of them were moving out of Black communities into the suburbs, and that really kind of it certainly changed the tone of protests when we needed that protest the most, right? The 1980s, of course, also was synonymous with the rise of mass incarceration and the rising drug wars and so many other issues that plagued the Black community. And so, again, this is not to suggest that Black colleges completely ignored those developments, but it certainly would have been nice to have the same type of atmosphere that students were exposed to in the 1960s and the previous generations still defining Black college student activism in the 70s and 80s. And the truth is that due to just changes in the curriculum, it just wasn't the case.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, as we say in my business. And you have much more to say in this book, and I'm encouraging everybody to read it. But guess what? There's 2 more opportunities for you to hear Dr. Favors. He'll be giving an author talk as part of the BPL's, that's the Boston Public Library Central Library Author Talk series. That's tomorrow, Friday at 3 p.m. You can register at BPL website. The address will be in the chat. Also, he will be a part of a panel entitled Activism, Radicalism, and Resistance in the Black Community with other MAAH Stone Book Award authors, Kelly Carter Jackson, Vincent Brown, Garrett Felber, and Carrie Greenwich at the Boston Book Festival, October 17th, Saturday at 3 p.m. I'm on the board of the Boston Book Festival. I highly recommend that. The address will be in chat and also in the email that will go out after the show. And please follow MAAH on Twitter and Instagram. Before we go, thank you to the team at the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the U.S. Senate, the Stone Foundation, the Boston Foundation, the Honorary Committee, those jurors, fantastic job, authors, the audience. Thank you so much for joining us, and see you here next year. Good night.